Dr. Harlan Voss slammed the patient chart onto the nurse's station counter so hard the clipboard bounced and skidded to the floor. Pull the IV, flush the line, start him on the standard protocol, and do not deviate. His voice was flat surgical, utterly without mercy. The man on the gurney was barely breathing. His lips had gone the color of old ash. His fingers curled like something already halfway gone. And Dr. Voss turned his back and walked away as if he had just signed a parking ticket, not a death warrant. If you are watching this right now, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and drop a comment telling us what city you are watching from. We want to see how far this story has traveled. Now let's get into it, because what happened next in that trauma bay changed everything. Selena Grant had worked the night shift at St. Jude's Medical Center for 11 years. 11 years of double shifts, cold coffee, and the particular kind of exhaustion that doesn't live in your muscles. It lives behind your eyes. She was 38 years old, 5'4", and invisible in the way that competent women in underfunded institutions tend to become invisible. She was not the nurse who cracked jokes at the station or brought homemade cookies on Fridays. She was the nurse who caught things. The nurse who noticed the drop in blood pressure before the monitor alarmed. The nurse who remembered that a patient had mentioned a penicillin allergy 3 hours earlier when no one else had written it down. She was the kind of nurse that the hospital couldn't run without and rarely bothered to thank. That Tuesday night in November was already bad before it became catastrophic. 2 car accidents, 1 drug overdose, a teenager with a broken wrist who kept trying to film herself for social media, and a 70-year-old man whose family was convinced he was dying of something exotic when he had in fact eaten bad shrimp. Selena had moved through all of it with the same quiet efficiency she brought to every shift, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning, mouth set in that calm, neutral line that nurses learn early because patients need steady, not scared. She was at the medication station when the ambulance bay doors blew open. The paramedics were moving fast, which they always did, but there was something different in their voices tonight, a particular edge. She heard it before she saw anything. GSW to the right flank, entry and exit confirmed B. P is dropping, pulse is thready at 110 home, and then the gurney came through and Selena looked at the man on it and felt something shift at the base of her throat. He was big, military built, the kind of frame that comes from years of disciplined punishment, not a gym. Mid-40s, close-cropped, dark hair, jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle working even through the blood loss. He had been shot, yes, the wound dressing on his right side was already soaked through, but that was not what made her throat tighten. It was his eyes, they were open. Tracking, he was looking at the ceiling tiles as the gurney rolled and his lips were moving, barely forming words she couldn't hear. She stepped in alongside the gurney without being asked. That was simply what she did. "What's his name?" she said to the paramedic. "ID says Thomas Hayes. Found him in an alley off Colfax. Anonymous 911 call. Any witnesses?" None that stuck around. Dr. Voss materialized at the foot of the gurney the way he always did, arriving just late enough to appear in charge without having done any of the urgent work. He was 55, silver-haired, and moved through the trauma center with the unhurried confidence of a man who had never once doubted his own conclusions. He glanced at the chart the paramedic handed him, made a sound low in his throat, and began issuing orders in that clipped, dismissive cadence Selena had spent years learning to quietly work around. GSW right flank, standard trauma protocol. Type and cross 2 large bore IVs, get me a CB and a B, and let's get him up to OR consult. He handed the chart back without looking at the patient's face. Selena was already pulling on gloves. She took the patient's wrist to check his pulse manually, a habit she'd never broken even in the age of monitors, and that was when she felt it. Or rather, when she noticed what she wasn't feeling. The pulse was wrong, not just weak from blood loss, the rhythm was wrong. There was a faint irregularity, a stuttering quality that didn't match a simple hemorrhagic presentation. She pressed 2 fingers harder, counting, and her eyes went to his face. His pupils were unequal. She looked at his fingernails. There was a subtle blue tinge at the nail beds that was deeper than simple oxygen loss. She looked at his lips again. The color was wrong in a specific way she had seen exactly once before during a poison control consult 3 years ago, when a man had come in after being exposed to an organophosphate compound at an agricultural facility. "Dr. Voss," she said. He was already walking toward the next bay. "Get him prepped and call OR." Dr. Voss, I need you to look at his pupils. He stopped. He turned slowly with the particular deliberateness of a man communicating that his patience is being taxed. Nurse Grant, his pupils are unequal. His nail beds are cyanotic in a pattern inconsistent with blood lesion alone. His pulse has an irregular quality. He was shot, Voss said with exaggerated patience, the kind people use on children. People who are shot present with irregular vitals. That is not a pharmacological event, it is a trauma event. Please prep him for OR consult and stop speculating beyond your scope of practice. He walked away. Selena stood very still for 2 seconds. In those 2 seconds, she ran through everything she knew, everything she'd read, everything she'd seen in 11 years of night shifts. Then she looked at Thomas Hayes, who was looking back at her now, with those tracking eyes, and she made a decision. Sir, she said quietly, leaning close, I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly. Have you been exposed to anything tonight chemically? Anything unusual? His lips moved. She had to lean close to hear him. Nerve agent, he whispered. Modified. VX derivative. The room did not stop. The monitors kept beeping. The paramedics were still filing paperwork at the station. Nurses moved in the corridor. The world continued in its ordinary fluorescent-lit way, completely unaware that Selena Grant's entire professional life had just arrived at a fork in the road. She stood up straight. She looked at the medication cart. Then she went to the phone and called the pharmacy. She did not call Dr. Voss. What she ordered was atropine in a dose that would raise eyebrows combined with pralidoxime drugs used in organophosphate and nerve agent poisoning. Drugs that were absolutely unambiguously outside the standing orders for a gunshot wound patient. Drugs that could end her career if she was wrong and might be the only thing standing between Thomas Hayes and a closed casket if she was right. Her hands were steady. They were always steady. That was the thing about Selena Grant. She didn't shake when it mattered. She saved the shaking for afterward in the parking lot alone in her car with the heat running and the radio off. The pharmacist paused on the line. Nurse Grant, those aren't on the standing orders for a trauma admission. I'm aware, she said. I'm documenting this under my own license. Please process it. Another pause, then processed. She hung up and started the first atropine push herself, watching his face, watching his eyes, watching the monitors with the focused intensity of someone who has made an irreversible choice and is now simply committed to being right about it. For 4 minutes, nothing changed. Then on the 5th minute, his breathing eased. Just slightly. Just enough. The irregular rhythm on the cardiac monitor smoothed by the smallest degree. His eyes, which had been glassy, sharpened. You knew, he said. His voice was still barely above a whisper, but it was clearer. I suspected, she corrected. There's a difference. You could lose your license. I'm aware of that too. She adjusted the IV drip without looking up. What happened to you tonight? He was quiet for a moment. She could see him calculating, deciding how much to say. I walked into something I wasn't supposed to walk out of, he finally said. Somebody made sure of that. The gunshot was a distraction, she said. It wasn't a question. The placement of the wound was survivable, serious but survivable. The kind of wound that would send a man to the OR where the real poison could do its work quietly masked by the chaos of surgery, explained away as complications. Someone wanted you in that OR. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't entirely read. Something between exhaustion and a kind of wary respect. You're not just a nurse, he said. I'm exactly just a nurse, she said. That's the point. Dr. Voss reappeared 20 minutes later when the OR team was ready and Thomas Hayes had been sufficiently stabilized for transport. He looked at the medication chart and his face did something complicated. He looked at Selena. He looked back at the chart. Who ordered the atropine protocol? I did, she said. The silence that followed had a specific texture. She had felt this kind of silence before the silence that precedes something being said that cannot be unsaid. My office, Voss said. After your shift. Of course, she said. She watched them wheel Thomas Hayes toward the elevator. He turned his head as the gurney moved, and for just a moment, his eyes found hers across the length of the trauma bay. He held her gaze for one long second. Then the elevator doors closed, and he was gone. Selena went back to work. She had 4 hours left on her shift in a waiting room full of people who needed her to be present and steady and exactly who she was. So she was. She didn't know, standing there at that nurse's station with cold coffee and a pen that was almost out of ink, that she had just pulled a thread that would unravel something enormous. She didn't know that the man in that elevator was carrying classified intelligence that 3 separate government agencies were trying to locate. She didn't know that the nerve agent in his bloodstream had been manufactured in a facility that officially did not exist by people who officially did not exist, as a part of an operation that the United States government was officially not aware of. She knew only what she could verify, that a man had come into her trauma bay, that something was wrong in a way that didn't add up, and that she had acted on what she knew. That was all she had, and for now, it had to be enough. At 6 in the morning, as the day shift filtered in with their fresh coffee and their uncomplicated expectations, Selena Grant sat across from Dr. Harlan Voss in his office and listened to him explain in precise and measured language that she had violated protocol, exceeded her scope of practice, created significant legal liability for the hospital, and would be subject to a formal review board that could result in the suspension or termination of her nursing license. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and her face composed into the neutral mask she'd spent 11 years perfecting, and she listened to every word. When he finished, she said, "The patient is alive." Voss looked at her over his reading glasses. "That is not the point." "With respect," she said, "it is exactly the point." She walked out of his office at 6:17 in the morning, got in her car, turned the heat on full, and sat for a long time staring at the gray November sky. Her hands, as always, waited until she was alone to start shaking. She was halfway home when she realized she hadn't gotten Thomas Hayes' contact information. She hadn't gotten any documentation of what he had told her. She had nothing, not a name that would check out, not a case number, not a witness. Just a man who had been wheeled into an elevator and had looked at her across a trauma bay like she had done something that mattered. She told herself it was enough. She told herself she would hear from the review board, deal with whatever consequences came, and move forward. She had done the right thing. That was all any of it ever came down to. She was wrong about the moving forward part, because Thomas Hayes was gone, not discharged, gone. When Selena called the hospital at noon, unable to sleep, and asked to be connected to his room, the unit clerk told her there was no record of a patient by that name having been admitted. When she pushed and asked to speak to the charge nurse on the surgical floor, the charge nurse confirmed the same thing. No Thomas Hayes, no record of the OR consult, no admission paperwork. It was as if he had never existed. Selena sat on the edge of her bed with the phone in her hand and felt the particular cold that has nothing to do with temperature. Somewhere in the back of her mind, behind 11 years of discipline and clinical precision, something that she had never really needed before was waking up. A alertness she couldn't name. An instinct that said, pay attention. Whatever this is, pay close attention. She didn't know yet that by morning there would be 2 men in dark suits sitting in the St. Jude's parking garage watching the staff entrance. She didn't know that her personnel file had already been accessed by someone who wasn't HR. She didn't know that the man she had saved was at that very moment in a secure medical facility being debriefed by people who had very urgent questions about the nurse who had identified a classified nerve agent in a Denver trauma center without any apparent reason to know what she was looking at. She knew only that a name had been erased, that a man had disappeared, and that she was about to be called before a board that could take everything she had built. She set her alarm for 3 hours of sleep, lay back against the pillow, and stared at the ceiling. 11 years, she thought. 11 years of catching what other people missed. 11 years of being the one who noticed, the one who stayed steady, the one who did the right thing in the dark and was never asked about it afterward. She closed her eyes. This time she had a feeling someone was going to ask. She got exactly 90 minutes of sleep before her phone rang. It was not her alarm. It was the hospital's main line, which meant someone had gone through the switchboard instead of calling her cell directly, which meant it was either H or administration, and neither of those options was good news at 7:43 in the morning after the night she'd just had. She answered on the 3rd ring with her eyes still closed. "Nurse Grant." The voice was Patricia Holt, the chief nursing officer. Efficient, no warmth always meant business. "We need you boy in my office at 10. Not the review board, just a preliminary conversation." I'll be there, Selena said. She hung up and stared at the ceiling for another 30 seconds. Then she got up, got dressed, and drove back to the hospital T had left less than 2 hours ago. Patricia Holt's office smelled like printer toner and burnt coffee. Patricia herself was a 60-year-old woman who had clawed her way up from bedside nursing through 30 years of politics and paperwork, and she had the look of someone who had made peace with the fact that every decision she made would disappoint someone. She gestured to the chair across from her desk without preamble. "Close the door," Patricia said. Selena closed it and sat down. "I'm going to ask you something directly, and I need you to answer me the same way." Patricia folded her hands on the desk. "The patient you treated last night, Thomas Hayes, what exactly did he say to you?" Selena felt her spine straighten by a fraction. He presented with symptoms inconsistent with a simple GSW. I assessed a secondary toxic exposure and treated accordingly. That's not what I asked. The silence between them had weight. Selena measured it carefully. He told me he'd been exposed to a nerve agent, she said finally. Modified VX derivative. Those were his words. Patricia's expression did not change, but something shifted behind her eyes. She picked up a pen, set it down again, then looked directly at Selena. "His record has been removed from our system." "I know. Not by us." That landed differently. Selena leaned forward slightly. "What do you mean, not by you?" "I mean, our IT department received a federal access request at 4:17 this morning. The kind that comes with paperwork that makes our legal team stop asking questions." Patricia's voice was entirely level, but Selena could hear the controlled discomfort beneath it. "His admission record, the paramedic intake, the pharmacy logs for your medication order, all of it is flagged under a federal hold." Selena sat very still. "Including my license documentation." "Including your license documentation." Patricia paused. "Selena, I have run this nursing department for 9 years. I have dealt with difficult physicians and impossible situations and patients who tried to sue us for things that defied logic. I have never had a federal agency scrub a patient record before 7 in the morning." She looked at her steadily. "Whatever you stepped into last night, it is larger than this hospital." "I treated a patient," Selena said. "That's all I did." "I believe you." Patricia picked up a folder and pushed it across the desk. "Dr. Voss has filed his formal complaint. The review board is scheduled for Friday. However," she hesitated, which was unusual for her. Patricia Holt did not hesitate. "2 men arrived at the staff entrance this morning. They asked for you by name. I told them you weren't in. They said they would wait." The cold came back, the same cold from the edge of the bed from the phone call that confirmed Thomas Hayes had been erased. Selena looked at the folder and did not open it. "What kind of men?" she said. "The kind with credentials that made our security guard take 3 steps backward." Patricia said. Selena stood up. "I need to know if they're still here. They were in the parking garage as of 20 minutes ago." Patricia looked at her with something that was not quite sympathy but was close to it. "The review board can be postponed. If there are federal circumstances that affect the nature of your decision last night that changes the context of the complaint considerably." "I'll handle the review board," Selena said. She picked up her bag. "Patricia, whatever those men want, whatever questions they ask about me, tell them exactly what you know. Nothing more, nothing less." "That's what I plan," Patricia said. Then quietly as Selena reached the door, "Be careful." It was the first time in 9 years that Patricia Holt had said that to her. Selena paused with her hand on the doorknob, absorbing the weight of it. Then she walked out. She didn't go toward the parking garage. She went to the trauma bay instead because she needed to think, and she thought best in motion, and because the trauma bay was the one place in this hospital where her instincts had always been reliable. She stood at the nurse's station where she'd stood 1,000 times, and she thought about a man with unequal pupils in a gunshot wound in a specific survivable location and whispered words that had rewritten her entire night. Nerve agent, modified, VX derivative. He hadn't been confused. His voice had been weak, but his words had been precise. A man who knew exactly what had been done to him and exactly how little time he had to communicate it. She was pulling up the pharmacy log on the workstation, not even sure what she was looking for, when she heard the footsteps behind her. Deliberate, unhurried, the kind of footsteps that belong to someone who doesn't worry about being noticed because they have decided the situation already belongs to them. She turned around. There were two of them, both in dark jackets, both with the specific blank-featured quality of people trained to be unreadable. The one on the left was younger, maybe 30, with a stillness about him that felt less like calm and more like readiness. The one on the right was older, mid-50s, gray at the temples, and he was the one who spoke. Selena Grant. "That's me," she said. "Special Agent Calloway, Federal Investigative Division." He held up credentials. She looked at them long enough to register they were real. "We'd like to speak with you somewhere private." "You're speaking to me right now," she said. "Whatever you have to say it here." The younger agent glanced around the trauma bay. There was a unit clerk at the far end and a traveling nurse restocking a cart, neither paying obvious attention. Calloway seemed to make a calculation. "The patient you treated last night," he said. "We need to know everything that was communicated to you." "I told my CNO what I knew. You are welcome to that account. We've spoken with Ms. Holt." He paused. "Mr. Grant, I want to be straightforward with you. Thomas Hayes is a federal asset operating under a classified designation. His admission to this facility last night was not sanctioned. The fact that you identified the nature of his exposure and intervened appropriately, that is not in question. What we need to understand is the extent of information he may have shared with you." Selena looked at him steadily. 11 years of managing panic in a trauma bay had given her a face that revealed very little when she needed it to reveal nothing. "He told me he'd been exposed to a nerve agent," she said. "I treated him. That's the sum total of our interaction." He said nothing else. He was barely conscious. Calloway studied her for a moment. "You're a nurse. For 11 years. And you identified a modified VX compound from clinical presentation alone. It wasn't quite a question. It was something more deliberate, a statement placed like a chess piece waiting to see what she'd move in response. "I identified a presentation consistent with organophosphate toxicity," she said evenly. "The patient confirmed the specific agent. I treated accordingly. If you're asking whether I have classified knowledge of nerve agent compounds, I don't. I have 11 years of pattern recognition and a very good memory for a poison control consult I attended in 2021. Something shifted in Calloway's expression. Not suspicion exactly, more like recalibration. He reached into his jacket and produced a card which he set on the counter between them. "If you remember anything else, or if anything unusual happens." "Unusual like federal agents showing up in my trauma bay." He almost smiled. "Almost. We'll be in touch, Ms. Grant." They left the same way they'd come, unhurried, deliberate, taking up space without apology. Selena watched them go and waited until they had cleared the double doors before she let out a slow breath. She picked up the card. No agency logo, just a name, a number, and the word Calloway printed in plain black type. She put it in her pocket. The rest of that day had the unreal quality of a fever dream. She wasn't scheduled to work, so she went home, sat at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee that went cold while she wasn't paying attention, and tried to construct a logical sequence out of what she knew. A man had been shot and poisoned simultaneously. The poisoning had been designed to be invisible, to look like surgical complications rather than deliberate assassination. Someone had wanted Thomas Hayes dead in a way that would never be investigated as a murder. And when she had interrupted that plan, the machinery behind it had been set in motion in a direction that now included her name. Her phone rang again at 2 in the afternoon. "Unknown number," she answered it. The voice on the other end was Thomas Hayes. She recognized it immediately, the particular timbre of it, quieter than it had been in the trauma bay, but with that same quality of controlled precision, each word placed carefully. Nothing wasted. "You answered," he said. "I almost didn't," she said honestly. "I wouldn't have called if it wasn't necessary." A pause. She could hear ambient sound behind him. Nothing identifiable, just the texture of somewhere that wasn't a hospital room. "The men who came to see you this morning, what did they want?" "They wanted to know what you told me." "What did you tell them?" "I'm sharing the minimum." Another pause, longer this time. "Why?" It was a fair question. She thought about it for a moment, looking at the cold coffee on her table at the late November light coming gray through the window. "Because you were my patient," she said, and because something about the way they asked felt like they were trying to determine how much of a loose end you'd created, not how much danger I was in. He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had shifted slightly, a quality she couldn't precisely name. something between wariness and something that might have been the beginning of trust. You're more perceptive than is probably comfortable for you right now. Tell me something I don't know, she said, starting with why a dead man is calling me from an unknown number. I'm not dead. According to St. Jude's Medical Center, you were never there. Operational necessity. That's a phrase people use when they don't want to give you a real answer. Yes, he said without any apparent embarrassment about this. It is. She heard him heard something that sounded like a door closing. Selena, the people who put that compound in my system, they know someone interfered. They know I was treated instead of dying in an OR. They are tracing the point of intervention. The cold, again. Sitting in her kitchen in broad daylight, the cold arrived like it had been waiting in the next room. They're tracing me, she said. It's possible. It's more than possible, or you wouldn't be calling. He didn't argue with that. I want you to leave your apartment tonight. Stay somewhere they don't have a reason to look. Thomas. She used his name deliberately. She had earned that. I treated you in my trauma bay, and now I may lose my license. And federal agents are interviewing my CNO, and the people who tried to kill you might be looking for me. I am past the point where leave your apartment is enough information. Silence. Then you're right. So talk to me. What he said next took 7 minutes and rearranged everything she thought she understood about the night before. He was not a soldier, not in any conventional sense. He was a covert asset working outside official channels, embedded in a network that had been tracking the distribution chain of a nerve agent that had already been used twice in 2 different countries in targeted assassinations that had been ruled natural deaths. The operation he had been running had gotten close enough to the manufacturing source that someone had decided to remove him. The gunshot had been the visible wound, the kind that would create paperwork and procedure and put him in a surgical suite where the poison already in his system could finish the job without anyone asking difficult questions. Except that Selena Grant had asked difficult questions. The compound they used, she said when he paused. The modification, it was designed to look like surgical complications. Standard protocol for an OR patient would have masked every marker within 40 minutes of intubation. By the time any pathologist looked at the tissue, it would have read as anesthetic reaction. And I pulled you out of that protocol. Yes. She sat with that for a moment. The full weight of it, not just the decision she'd made, but the precision of what she'd interrupted. Someone had engineered this down to the pharmacological level. Someone who understood hospital procedure well enough to weaponize it. How many people know what you know, she said. Fewer than yesterday, he said. That's the problem. And the people who made that compound, how close are they? He hesitated. Just briefly, barely a beat, but she caught it, and it told her everything she needed to know before he said it. Closer than Calloway knows, he said. She stood up from the kitchen table. She picked up her coffee cup, looked at it, set it back down. Her hands were steady as they always were when it mattered. Where are you? Somewhere safe for now. Thomas, where are you? A long pause, then an address. Denver not far. The kind of neighborhood where nobody pays attention to anybody else's business because everybody has enough of their own. I'll come to you, she said. Selena. You called me, she said, which means you need something, and whatever it is, you're not going to get it by being cryptic on a phone call. She picked up her keys. I'll be there in 20 minutes. She was there in 18. The man who opened the door looked worse than the man who had been wheeled into her trauma bay the night before, which was saying something. The gunshot wound had been treated. She could see the bulk of proper dressing through his shirt, but he was pale in the way people are pale when their body is directing all available resources toward repair and has nothing left over for appearances. He stepped back to let her in without a word. She crossed the threshold, looked at him the way she'd looked at 1,000 patients doing the automatic rapid assessment that she couldn't turn off any more than she could stop breathing. Pulse visible at the throat, elevated but regular. Eyes clear, color poor but stable. He was upright and coherent, which 24 hours ago had been genuinely uncertain. You look terrible, she said. You saved my life, he said. I think that earns you the right to say so. She set her bag on the table and looked at him directly. Tell me everything. Not the version you give to federal agents. Everything. Thomas Hayes looked at her for a long moment, This man who had been trained to trust no one, who operated in spaces where information was currency and vulnerability was a liability. And then he sat down and he started talking. And the thing that he told her, the thing that he laid out in precise, unembellished detail in that small room, in that quiet Denver neighborhood, was the reason that in less than 48 hours, Selena Grant would not be a nurse standing at a medication cart. She would be the most important person in a situation that no one in her life, not Patricia Holt, not Dr. Voss, not the review board that was scheduled for Friday morning, could possibly have imagined. But that understanding was still arriving. For now, there was only Thomas Hayes's voice and the story he was telling, and Selena Grant listening to every single word with the focused intensity of a woman who had spent 11 years catching what other people missed. She wasn't going to miss this. Thomas talked for 40 minutes without stopping, and Selena listened without interrupting, which was harder than it sounded because every 3 minutes he said something that made her want to ask 6 questions at once. She held them back and let him finish the way she held back everything that could wait until the critical information was on the table. The compound had a name in the classified files designator Hex 7. It wasn't manufactured in a lab that appeared on any government registry. It had been developed by a private contractor operating under the cover of a pharmaceutical research group with offices in 4 countries and a very clean public profile. The contractor's client was a cartel, not a drug cartel in the traditional sense, but an organizational structure that moved money weapons and occasionally people across jurisdictions that didn't cooperate with each other well enough to track it. They had been using Hex 7 for 2 years. 3 confirmed kills, all ruled as medical events, all in individuals who had been about to testify, report, or otherwise inconvenience someone with significant resources. Thomas had been their 4th target. He had gotten close enough to the manufacturing chain to be a problem, and someone inside the intelligence apparatus, someone with access to his operational schedule, had flagged his location to the contractor's security arm. Someone inside, Selena said when he reached that part. You mean someone in your own organization told them where you'd be? Yes. Do you know who I have a strong suspicion. He said it the way people say things they've been turning over for hours, examining from every angle, hoping to find a different conclusion and not finding one. Which is part of why I can't go back to official channels right now. Until I know who the leak is, every communication I make through sanctioned networks is potentially compromised. Selena leaned back in her chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. The full architecture of it was settling into place in her mind, the way it did when a complicated clinical picture finally cohered into a diagnosis. So, Calloway, she said, those federal agents, are they... I don't know where Calloway sits, Thomas said. That's honest. He could be clean. He could be part of the problem. He could be operating on information that was fed to him by someone who wants to know how much I told you before they decide what to do about you. About me, she said flatly. You interrupted an operation, Selena. A very precisely engineered operation. The people who built that operation don't leave variables unresolved. She processed that in silence for a moment. Outside, Denver went on doing what Denver did on a gray November afternoon, traffic when someone's dog barking 2 buildings over. The ordinary world proceeding entirely without awareness of the conversation happening inside this particular room. What do they know about me? She said. By now, your name, your license, your address. He paused. Probably your shift schedule. She didn't let herself react visibly. How long do I have before this becomes a physical threat? I think you have tonight, he said. Maybe less. She stood up. Not from panic. Selena Grant did not panic. It was not in her makeup, but because standing helped her think, and she needed to think right now with a great deal of clarity. She walked to the window, stood to the side of it, out of habit, and looked at the street below. Everything looked ordinary. That she was beginning to understand was not reassuring. You said you had a team, she said. When you were working this operation, people you trusted. He said. The single word carried a specific weight. She turned to look at him. How many? 2 that I know are still operational. 1 I've been unable to reach for 18 hours. He held her gaze. There is someone else, a unit commander I've worked with before. He's been tracking the Hex 7 distribution chain independently outside official channels. He reached out to me 6 hours ago. And he's 20 minutes from here. The knock at the door came before she could respond to that. 3 sharp raps evenly spaced. Thomas's posture changed not dramatically, just a degree of readiness that shifted the quality of the air in the room. He looked at her, then at the door. "That's him," he said. "You were expecting him." "I was hoping." She stayed where she was and watched Thomas cross to the door. He checked something through the peephole. She noticed he stood to the side while doing it, which was not how civilians check peepholes, and then opened it. The man who came through the door was built like someone who had spent his entire adult life making his body into a tool. He was somewhere in his late 40s with a face that had clearly been through weather and pressure and a few things that didn't have polite names. He had the kind of eyes that took inventory of a room in about half a second. She felt his assessment of her, like a physical thing, quick and thorough and entirely without apology. "Captain Miller," Thomas said. "Hayes." Miller looked at him the way men look at each other when they've both survived things that don't get talked about openly. Then he looked at Selena. "You're the nurse." "I'm a nurse," she said. "Whether I'm still employed as one is currently under review." Something that was almost amusement crossed his face and was gone. "Captain Ray Miller, I'd say it's a pleasure, but we're a little past pleasantries." He moved into the room with the efficient economy of someone who had never learned to take up space carelessly. He pulled a phone from his jacket, pulled up something on the screen, and held it toward her. "You recognize this?" She looked. It was a photograph, surveillance quality, slightly grainy, taken from elevation. 3 men standing outside what appeared to be a parking structure. One of them was Agent Calloway. "Yes," she said. "That's one of the federal agents who came to the hospital this morning." "Calloway." Miller put the phone away. "He's not dirty, but the man he reports to is. Which means everything Calloway knows goes up a chain that eventually reaches someone who is actively feeding the contractor's security team." He looked at Thomas. "They know you survived. They identified the hospital. They pulled the pharmacy records before the federal hold locked them. They got Selena's name 16 hours ago." Thomas said something under his breath that she didn't catch. "It gets worse," Miller said in the tone of someone who has learned to say hard things directly because dragging them out doesn't make them smaller. "I've been running surveillance on the contractor's local security arm for the past 9 days. They moved a team into Denver 48 hours ago. 6 people. Professional hitters, not foot soldiers. These are people who get paid to clean up operational failures." He looked at Selena. "Finding you is not a secondary objective for them. It has become a primary one." The cold that Selena had been carrying since the previous night arrived in full force. She stood with it the way she stood with difficult diagnoses in the trauma bay, not turning away from it, not minimizing it, just holding it steady while she figured out what came next. "Why me specifically?" she said. "I'm a nurse. I identified a toxic exposure and treated it. That's not intelligence work." "No," Miller said, "but you can testify to what Thomas told you. You can confirm the compound, the target, the mechanism. You are the only civilian witness to any part of this operation who is currently alive and able to speak." He said it without particular drama, just facts laid flat on the table. "That makes you a problem they need to resolve." "So what are you proposing?" she said. Miller and Thomas exchanged a look, the kind that carries a whole conversation in about 2 seconds. Then Miller pulled out a chair, sat down, and leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. "Here's where we are. I have 2 operatives, people I trust completely, who can be here within 3 hours. Thomas is functional, but not at full capacity. You know this hospital. You know its layout, its systems, every corridor and supply room in that building." "St. Jude's," she said. "The contractor's team doesn't know the layout. They'll have floor plans, but floor plans are not the same as 11 years of working in a building at 2 in the morning. He paused. "We need a location to hold a defensive position tonight. Somewhere we can control access. Somewhere we know better than they do." Selena looked at him. "You want to use my hospital as a tactical position." "I want to use your knowledge of it," he said. "There's a difference. Not if people get hurt in it." "That's exactly why we need you," he said. "You know where the patients are. You know where the staff moves. You can help us route this away from anyone who shouldn't be involved." She was quiet for a moment. She thought about Patricia Holt saying, "Be careful." She thought about the review board scheduled for Friday. She thought about Thomas Hayes' eyes finding hers across the trauma bay as the elevator doors closed. She thought about 11 years of catching what other people missed, 11 years of doing the right thing in the dark and never being asked about it afterward. How much time do I have to decide, she said. About 90 minutes, Miller said. After that, we're deciding for you by default. She looked at Thomas. Is this the only play? It's the best one we have, he said honestly. I won't tell you it's without risk. I know it's not without risk. She picked up her bag from the table. I'm going to need to make a call, someone at the hospital who can get me access to the East Wing after hours without triggering a security flag. Miller nodded slowly. Who? Patricia Holt, she said. My CNO. She already knows something federal is involved. She's smart enough not to ask questions I can't answer, and she's been running that department for 9 years without blinking. She looked at both of them in turn. I'm not going in there without her knowing I'm in the building. She covers for the staff she trusts, and I am not going to put her in a position where she doesn't know enough to protect herself. Miller thought about it for 3 seconds. Agreed. She had her phone out before he finished the word. Patricia answered on the second ring, which meant she was still at the hospital, or at least still working. Selena kept it short and precise. She needed access to the East Wing, specifically the corridor connecting the old psychiatric unit to the main building, and she needed the overnight security rotation to leave that wing on a normal pass cycle without deviation. She gave Patricia no details she didn't absolutely need, and Patricia, to her enduring credit, asked exactly 2 questions. Is anyone going to get hurt who shouldn't, and do you need me to call anyone? No to both, Selena said. Not yet. I'll arrange the access, Patricia said. Selena, a pause. You come back from this, you hear me? I'm not training another charge nurse. Selena almost smiled at that, which surprised her. I'll be there for the review board Friday, she said, and hung up. The next 90 minutes moved with the compressed functional quality of time under pressure, every action deliberate, no motion wasted. Miller's 2 operatives arrived at the hour mark, a woman named Cross, who was compact and quiet and moved with an economy that reminded Selena of Thomas, and a man called Reyes, who was younger, sharper-edged with the specific alertness of someone who had spent time in places where inattention had permanent consequences. They didn't introduce themselves with much elaboration. They assessed the situation, took their positions in the plan Miller laid out, and that was enough. Selena listened to the tactical outline and added her knowledge where it mattered. The East Wing's old psychiatric unit had been closed for renovation 3 years ago and had never been fully reopened. It existed in the institutional limbo of hospitals everywhere, accessible but unused, its systems partially functional, and its layout unchanged from the original construction. She knew it the way she knew everything about St. Jude's, not from a blueprint, but from years of shortcuts and supply runs, and the particular intimacy of a building you've worked in long enough that it starts to feel like an extension of your own body. She told them about the oxygen lines, the old system still functional, running through the basement conduit into the East Wing. She told them about the MRI quench port in the former imaging annex, a fail-safe mechanism that could release a significant volume of helium gas if triggered manually, effectively incapacitating anyone in the adjacent corridor within 40 seconds. She told them about the stairwell at the north end that didn't appear on the renovated floor plans because it had been partially sealed and most people had simply forgotten it existed. Miller listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. You've thought about this building, he said. I've worked nights there for 11 years, she said. You think about things differently at 3 in the morning. How does it feel, he said, telling us all of this? It was an unexpected question. She thought about it honestly before answering. Like when you know a patient's deteriorating and everyone else thinks the numbers look stable, she said. You stop waiting for someone else to act. Cross spoke for the first time since arriving from across the room. She's going to be fine, she said to no one in particular. It was a professional assessment delivered without sentiment, which somehow made it land harder than if it had been meant kindly. At 9:47 that night, Selena Grant walked through the St. Jude's Medical Center service entrance with a key card Patricia Holt had left for her in a maintenance lockbox and the weight of everything she knew pressing steadily against the inside of her chest. Miller was behind her. Thomas was behind him, moving more carefully than he would have liked, the gunshot wound reminding him with every step that his body was currently working against a deficit. Cross and Reyes took the parallel route through the loading bay. The hospital at night had a particular quality that Selena had always found against all logic calming. The sounds were familiar, the distant beep of monitors, the soft announcement from the intercom on the third floor, the particular click and hum of a building settling into its overnight rhythms. She knew all of it. Every sound had a source she could name. She led them through the main service corridor without hesitation, through the maintenance access door that required the older key card down the utility stair to the East Wing basement junction. She moved without pausing, without checking the map Miller had on his phone, because she didn't need it. At the junction, she stopped, listened. The building was doing what it always did at this hour. The psychiatric wing entrance is 30 feet ahead and to the left, she said quietly. Once we're through, there's a central hub that connects 4 corridors. That's where we set up. You're sure about the oxygen line access point, Miller said. I'm the person who reported it as a safety concern in 2022 and was told it wasn't a budget priority, she said. I'm sure. He nodded once. Then let's move. She pushed the door open and went through first because it was her building and because whatever happened next, she was not going to walk into it from behind. The lights in the East Wing were on their overnight setting, low steady, casting the corridor in a quality of light that made everything look slightly paused like a held breath. The air had the dry, neutral smell of spaces that aren't used enough to gather the ordinary odors of human activity. Selena moved to the central hub and stopped. Miller came in behind her. Cross and Reyes materialized from the north stair like they had simply always been there. For a moment, all 5 of them were still. Then Miller's phone vibrated. He looked at the screen. His jaw tightened by a fraction. She was watching for it, and she caught it. They're in the building, Tim, he said. Not 20 minutes from the building. Not approaching the building. In it. Selena looked at him and felt everything sharpened down to a single point of clarity. The same clarity that arrived every time a patient coded, every time a situation became the thing you'd been trained for without ever being able to fully prepare for. The kind of clarity that is not the absence of fear, but the decision to function through it. How many, she said. 5 confirmed, he said. Possibly 6. She looked at the 4 corridors branching from the hub. She thought about the oxygen lines. She thought about the MRI quench port. She thought about 11 years of knowing this building better than anyone who had ever wanted to use it as a killing ground. Then we're ready, she said, and she meant it. Miller's hand went up, flat palm, the universal signal for absolute stillness, and everyone in that hub went quiet in the way that people go quiet when noise could be the thing that gets them killed. Selena held her breath. She could hear Thomas behind her, his breathing controlled and deliberate, working hard to keep it that way, through the pain she knew was pressing at the edges of his focus. 5 confirmed, possibly 6. She did the math automatically the way she did medication calculations, quick, clean, no room for error. 5 trained hitters moving through a building they didn't know. 4 people on their side, one of them compromised by a gunshot wound, less than 48 hours old. And Selena Grant, who had never in her life been in a tactical situation, but who knew every inch of the ground they were standing on better than anyone alive. She leaned close to Miller. Which entrance did they use? He looked at his phone. A small device was running some kind of signal trace she hadn't asked him to explain. Main service corridor, the same route we came in. Then they're following our path. They had it before we did, he said. Someone gave them the access route. His voice was level, but something moved behind his eyes. The access Patricia arranged. Patricia didn't leak it, Selena said immediately firmly, the way she pushed back on wrong diagnoses. She didn't know enough to leak. Someone tracked the keycard activation. Which means they have access to the hospital's security system, Cross said from 2 feet away, her voice barely above a breath. Or someone inside the hospital gave it to them, Reyes said. The implication landed like a stone in still water, and the ripples went outward in every direction. Selena felt the chill of it and then set it aside because there was no time to follow it right now. It doesn't change the position, she said. They're coming this way. We set up what we planned. Miller looked at her for 1 beat. Then Reyes North Corridor Oxygen Junction. Cross take the east access point. Hayes, you're with me at the hub. Selena? He paused. You know where the MRI quench port is. 30 feet down the west corridor panel on the left side behind the maintenance board. Can you get there and back in under 2 minutes? She already knew the answer. Yes. The moment I give the signal, you trigger it. The gas will push through the adjacent corridor. That's the only route they have into the hub from the service entrance. It won't kill them, but it will drop visibility to nothing, and anyone without a mask goes down in 40 seconds. He held her gaze. Do not trigger it early. If you do it while any of our people are still in that corridor, we lose Cross. I understand, she said. Selena. His voice dropped, became something less tactical and more direct. This is not a hospital protocol. There is no supervisor to call if something goes wrong. Once you walk down that corridor, you are committed. I've been committed, she said, since I picked up that phone and ordered the atropine. He held her gaze for one more second. Then he nodded. She went. The west corridor was dark overnight, lighting only that low amber quality that turned everything to shadow and shape. She moved fast, keeping to the side of the hallway, her footsteps absorbed by the older linoleum that hadn't been replaced in the renovation. The maintenance panel was exactly where she'd known it would be. She'd reported it in 2022. She'd walked past it 100 times on overnight supply runs, always with the background mental note of infrastructure in a building she knew better than her own apartment. She got the panel open in under 30 seconds. The quench port was a red-capped valve, clearly marked, designed to be used in the specific emergency of an MRI magnetic field failure. She'd never triggered one. She'd been trained on the protocol once during a safety certification that most of her colleagues had treated as a formality. She put her hand on the valve cap and waited. From the hub behind her, she could hear nothing. That was either good or very bad. She stood in the dark with her hand on the valve and counted her heartbeats and waited for Miller's signal. It came at the 2-minute mark, 3 short vibrations from the phone in her pocket, the pattern Miller had established before they split. She turned the valve. The sound it made was a deep, pressurized exhale, more substantial than she'd expected, a rush of released gas that moved through the conduit system into the corridor with the decisiveness of something that had been waiting under pressure for years. She heard it travel. She felt the air pressure in the corridor shift. She had 40 seconds before the gas reached effective concentration in the adjacent corridor. She used them to move back toward the hub. She was halfway there when she heard the first voice, male, coming from the service corridor, not a language she recognized, low and urgent. Then a second voice responding. Then a sound that was unmistakably the impact of a human body against a wall. Solid, final, someone going down hard. She kept moving. When she came back into the hub, Cross was at the east access point with her arm extended, and Reyes was coming in from the north corridor at a controlled run, and Thomas was standing at the hub's center with a weapon she hadn't known he was carrying held in both hands, pointed at the service corridor entrance. Miller was 2 feet to Thomas's left, and his attention was split between 2 directions at once, in the way of someone tracking multiple developments simultaneously. 3 down in the service corridor, Miller said without looking at her. The gas worked. We've got 2 more unaccounted for. How come? She started. They split, Cross said, from the east point. 2 of them went around. They knew the main route would be covered. They anticipated the choke point, Reyes said. Selena processed this. They had adjusted. These were not foot soldiers who moved on a fixed plan. They were adaptive, which meant whoever had briefed them had given them enough information to improvise. The leak wasn't just the access route. It was the tactical outline. Someone had told them enough to work around a defensive position. Miller, she said. I know, he said. Someone knew our setup. I know, he repeated. And the way he said it the second time was different from the first, heavier, carrying something she hadn't heard in his voice until now. How many people knew the full plan, she said. He didn't answer immediately. That itself was an answer. Miller, how many people knew the full tactical setup for this position? The 5 of us in this room, he said. And 1 other contact I briefed remotely 2 hours ago, someone I've trusted for 6 years. He said the last sentence in a tone she recognized, the tone of someone discovering in real time that a belief they've held for a long time was wrong in a way they can't fully absorb yet. Thomas spoke from across the hub. His voice was tight, pain and adrenaline running together, neither one winning. Who? Miller said a name. It was 1 syllable said quietly, and it made Thomas go completely still. For 3 full seconds, which was 3 seconds of complete stillness in a situation that could not afford it. That's not possible, Thomas said. 2 unaccounted hostiles who knew our choke point before we activated it, Miller said. It's not just possible. It already happened. The east access door moved. Cross reacted before anyone had time to speak. She was already in motion, already pushing back against the door with her shoulder and her full body weight. And for a moment, it was just the sound of a physical contest happening. 6 inches of steel, Cross on one side, and whatever was on the other. Reyes crossed the hub in 4 strides and hit the door beside her. Reinforce the north door, Miller said to Selena, and she went without hesitation because standing still had stopped being an option. She got to the north door and put her back against it and felt nothing pushing back, which meant either the north approach was clear or whoever was coming from that direction hadn't arrived yet. She looked back at the hub and tried to build a picture from the sounds Cross and Reyes holding the east door, Thomas covering the service corridor entrance, Miller moving to a position she couldn't see. The north door hit her back with a force that knocked her forward 2 steps. She spun and grabbed the door handle with both hands and pulled against it, planting her feet leaning back with her full weight. 11 years of lifting patients of 12-hour shifts on concrete floors, of a body trained by necessity rather than intention. She had more in her than most people would have expected. But the thing on the other side of that door had more than she did, and she knew it within the first 3 seconds. Reyes, she said, not a shout controlled clear of the way she called for assistance in the trauma bay when things went wrong without going to panic. Reyes was there in 6 seconds, which was 4 seconds too long, but the best that could be done. He hit the door beside her, and together they held it, and for 15 seconds the door didn't move, and then it stopped moving against them entirely. The silence that followed had a specific quality, the quality of a pause, not an ending. Whoever was on the other side had made a decision to stop pushing, and a tactical decision to stop pushing was not the same as leaving. They're repositioning, Thomas said. He had moved to cover the north corridor sightline. The gas in the service corridor is clearing. The 3 who went down will be coming around. How long? Miller said. 8 minutes, maybe less. Thomas's face was pale now in a way that had nothing to do with the overhead lighting. The wound was collecting its debt. She could see it in the set of his jaw, in the controlled shallowness of his breathing. Thomas, she said, I'm fine. You're not, and we both know it, and I need you to tell me what you actually need so I can make a decision about how to use the next 8 minutes. He looked at her, something crossed his face that was not quite frustration and not quite gratitude. I need to stay upright for another hour, he said. After that, you can tell me I'm not fine all you want. Epinephrine, she said immediately. I have a kit in my bag. I brought a trauma kit when I came in. It won't fix the wound, but it will buy you the function. She was already moving to where she'd set her spag against the wall. It's going to hurt. Most things worth doing do, he said, which was either philosophy or a pain response, and she decided it didn't matter which. She administered it in 40 seconds. He absorbed the reaction, a sharp intake of breath, the muscles in his jaw going rigid, and then he exhaled, and his posture realigned by a degree that she could quantify. Not healed, but functional. That was all they needed. All right, Miller said, and his voice had recovered its command quality, which meant he had set aside whatever he was processing about the contact he'd trusted for 6 years and put it somewhere to be dealt with when they were alive enough to deal with it. We cannot hold this hub. They know the layout of our position. We need to move to the secondary fallback. The abandoned imaging annex, Selena said. Yes. There's a problem with that, she said. He looked at her. The imaging annex connects to the main building's 2nd floor via the old service bridge, she said. If we move there and they know this building as well as they're demonstrating, that bridge becomes an approach vector. We can't cover with 4 people. 3.5, Thomas said, referring to himself without self-pity. Just accurate accounting. Can the bridge be disabled? Miller said. She thought about it. Not long she didn't have long. The bridge operated on a hydraulic door system that was original to the building, separate from the main electronic access. It could be manually locked from either side. It could also, if the hydraulic reservoir was drained, be rendered inoperable without specialized equipment to reopen. Yes, she said, but I have to do it from the bridge itself, and I have to do it before we move the group through. If someone is coming across that bridge when I'm on it, you don't go alone, Miller said. There's no one to spare. Cross, Miller said. Cross looked at him from the east door. She had not said a single word since the door had stopped moving, and her expression had the particular focused blankness of someone running at high operational capacity. Ready, she said. Selena looked at Miller one more time. There was something she wanted to say, something about the 6-year contact, about who else might know, about what it meant that the people coming through this building had more information than they should. But there wasn't time for it, and Miller's eyes told her he was already carrying it, already working it through the part of his mind that kept running even when the rest of him was occupied. Go ahead, he said. 5 minutes. She and Cross moved. The corridor to the imaging annex was one Selena had walked approximately 300 times. She had walked it with supply carts and patient files, and once memorably with a defibrillator that had needed emergency servicing at 2 in the morning. She walked it now with Cross 6 inches behind her, and the sound of the hub receding and the particular suspended quality of a building at night when something wrong is happening inside it. The bridge hydraulic panel was at the midpoint of the service bridge, a gray metal box bolted to the wall, standard hospital maintenance infrastructure absolutely invisible to anyone who didn't already know to look for it. Selena had it open in under a minute. The reservoir drain was a simple valve, the kind that required a quarter turn. She turned it. The sound of the hydraulic fluid draining was quiet, mechanical, unremarkable. She held the panel door and listened to it empty and watched the pressure gauge drop and thought, this is the most expensive thing I have ever done to this hospital, and Patricia is going to have complicated feelings about it. Done, she said. Someone's on the bridge, Cross said. Selena went cold. She could hear it now, footsteps from the far side of the bridge moving toward them. Not running. Deliberate. One person, maybe two. She looked at the hydraulic panel. The bridge doors were locked now. Whoever was coming across couldn't get through from the far side. But they were already on the bridge, which meant they were between the lock and the door, which meant the lock didn't help. Cross stepped in front of her. One smooth, unhesitating motion, positioning herself between Selena and whatever was coming down that bridge. It was not a gesture of protection so much as a tactical decision, and Selena understood that, but the effect was the same. The footsteps stopped. A voice came from the dark of the bridge mail with an accent she couldn't immediately place. We are not here for the nurse, it said. Step aside. Cross said nothing. This is not your fight, the voice said. The woman is a civilian. Give her to us, and your team walks away. No one gave you that authority, Cross said. It was the most words Selena had heard her say in one sentence. A pause from the bridge. The quality of the pause was different now, recalculating. Selena's hand was in her bag. She didn't have a weapon. She never had a weapon. What she had was a trauma kit and 11 years of knowing what was in her immediate vicinity and how to use it. Her fingers found the sealed epinephrine cartridge she hadn't used on Thomas. Then found the sealed irrigation syringe beside it, 100 milliliters of saline solution under pressure. It was not a weapon. It was also at close range, directed at the right point of vulnerability, enough to shock a person into a momentary recoil that could change the geometry of a situation. Cross, she said quietly, I need you to step left. Cross looked at her, one sharp assessing look. Then she stepped left. Selena threw the irrigation syringe contents directly toward the sound of the breathing on the bridge, aimed high fast, the practiced aim of someone who had been administering targeted injections in motion for over a decade. The figure on the bridge recoiled exactly as she'd calculated, exactly the reflex that so lean to the face in total darkness would produce, and Cross moved into the gap with a speed and economy that Selena's brain registered but couldn't fully track. 30 seconds later, there was silence on the bridge. Cross came back through the door with a neutral expression and a bruised jaw that she had not had 30 seconds ago. Let's go, she said. Selena followed her without question. When they came back into the hub, Miller was on his phone and Thomas had moved to cover a third quarter, which meant something had changed in the 90 seconds she'd been gone. Miller looked at her as she came in, and something in his face shifted, relief contained inside tactical readiness, the very specific emotion of a person who had been running worst-case scenarios and was recalculating them. The service corridor team is regrouping, he said. We have about 4 minutes. The bridge is locked and we've accounted for their approach from the annex, she said. 2 down, 3 regrouping, Reyes said, and 1 position still unknown. Miller's phone buzzed. He looked at it. He went very still in a way that told her the message was not tactical. It was the other kind of still, the kind that meant something fundamental had just changed. He showed her the screen. The message was from Calloway. 4 words. I know who leaked. Coming now. She looked up at Miller. He was already looking at her. Around them, the building held its breath in the way that buildings do when something inside them has reached its turning point, the moment before the thing that cannot be undone is done. He's 10 minutes out, Miller said. We don't have 10 minutes, Thomas said from across the hub. Then we make 10 minutes, Selena said, and looked at the four corridors around her and felt the clarity come back sharp, clean, the same clarity that arrived at every critical moment she had ever faced in this building. She had made it this far by knowing exactly what she was doing. She was not about to stop now. 10 minutes was not something they had. But Selena had spent 11 years learning that the time you actually have and the time you need are two different numbers, and the only thing that bridges them is deciding without reservation what you are going to do in the gap. The oxygen junction, she said to Miller. Reyes sealed it when we moved correct. Correct. There's a secondary feed valve behind the junction. It's part of the original building system, not the renovation. If someone who knew what they were looking at opened that valve, they could reroute the oxygen flow backward through the east corridor's ventilation return. She was already doing the calculation as she spoke. It would create a highly oxygen-enriched atmosphere in any sealed room on that return line. Miller looked at her with the specific expression of someone who has just understood something several beats ahead of where they expected to be. How enriched? Enough that a single spark from a tactical device, a flashbang, a breaching charge, anything with an ignition component would accelerate beyond controlled parameters, she said. They won't know that. They'll breach with standard equipment. The silence in the hub lasted exactly 2 seconds. That's extremely dangerous, Reyes said. Yes, she agreed. It's also the only move we have that accounts for 3 regrouping professionals who know our position with 4 minutes until they come back through that service corridor, and 1 unknown hostile still unaccounted for. Miller looked at Thomas. Thomas looked at Selena. His face had the quality of a man who has spent his career calculating acceptable risk and has just met someone who can do the same math with different variables and arrive at a correct answer from a direction he hadn't considered. If we're in the hub when that corridor ignites, Thomas started. We won't be, she said. The north stair, the sealed one that doesn't appear on the renovated floor plans. It connects to the second floor landing directly above this hub. We go up before they breach. The fire suppression system in the east corridor was decommissioned during renovation. It's on the pending repair list. I filed the report myself. She looked at Miller. The sprinklers in the hub are still active. We go up the north stair. The hub suppression keeps it contained. The east corridor does not. Miller stared at her for 3 full seconds. You filed a maintenance report on a decommissioned fire suppression system. In February, she said. It was rejected for budget reasons. Something crossed his face that under different circumstances might have been a smile. Reyes, he said, oxygen junction secondary feed valve. Oh, you have 90 seconds, Reyes went. Thomas crossed north stair. Move. He looked at Selena. You're with me. I need to make Patricia's people are clear of the East Wing entirely, she said. The overnight nursing staff sometimes cuts through the basement connection. Already handled, he said. I had Calloway's people reroute the staff 2 hours ago without telling them why. She absorbed that. You planned for this contingency. I planned for several contingencies, he said. You were the one who knew which one to use. They moved. Reyes came back from the junction in 80 seconds, which was 10 seconds faster than he'd been given, and gave Miller a single nod as he passed through. Cross had found the north stair exactly where Selena had said it would be, a narrow access behind a maintenance panel that opened on a latch rather than a key card, the kind of infrastructure that gets sealed and forgotten when buildings get renovated around their own bones. Thomas went up first because the geometry required it, and she watched him take the stairs with the controlled deliberateness of a man who has decided that his body's protests are not relevant to the current situation and is simply implementing that decision. Cross went behind him close enough to catch him if the decision failed. Reyes went next. Miller put his hand on the wall panel and looked at Selena. After you. She went up. The second floor landing above the hub was dark and disused, the kind of space that exists in old buildings between what they were and what they became. Floor plans on paper, empty square footage in practice. She could feel the building around her the way she always could in the quiet hours, its familiar weight and dimension, every creak and breath of it known to her in the way that only long familiarity creates. They were 40 seconds clear of the hub when the east corridor lit up. She felt it before she heard it, a pressure change, a deep concussive shift in the air that traveled through the structure like a pulse. Then the sound arrived, a contained detonation that was sharp and fast, and ended almost before it began, followed by the secondary sound of the suppression system engaging in the hub below water hitting floor, the automated response of a building protecting itself. Nobody on the landing said anything for 3 seconds. 3 down, Reyes said. It was not a question. The unknown sixth, Cross said. As if the building had heard her, a sound came from the far end of the second-floor corridor, controlled measured footsteps moving toward their position from the direction of the main building's service bridge access. Not the locked bridge, the other one. The one Selena had not thought to lock because it was on the second floor, and the second floor wasn't supposed to be part of this. She had missed something. In 11 years of this building, she had missed one thing, and it was arriving from the far end of the corridor at a measured walk. Options, Miller said very quietly. There's a crash cart storage room 8 feet to our left, she said. Original construction, thick walls locks from inside. We'd be cornered. The room has a pass-through panel to the adjacent biomedical equipment closet, which connects to the main elevator shaft landing, she said. It's not on any floor plan because it was used for equipment transfer before the renovation closed off the direct road. Nobody knows it exists unless they've moved a broken ventilator at 3 in the morning and discovered that the wall panel opens. He looked at her. The footsteps were getting closer. Have you moved a broken ventilator at 3 in the morning? Twice, she said. Move, he said. 8 feet to the left, the storage room door, the lock engaged from inside in under 4 seconds. Selena went directly to the pass-through panel on the far wall, knee height, approximately 2 feet square, the kind of opening that makes complete sense in context and is completely invisible if you don't even know what you're looking at. She got it open and turned to Thomas. You're going to hate this, she said. I already hate most things about tonight, he said. That's fine. He went through first because he was the most compromised, and the pass-through opened into a space large enough to stand in, which meant getting him through and upright on the other side before the others followed was the correct sequencing. Cross helped from behind. He made one sound going through sharp involuntary, the sound of a wound being reminded of itself, and then he was through, and Cross was through, and Reyes was through, and Miller was last pulling the panel behind him. The footsteps reached the storage room door. Everyone in the elevator shaft landing went absolutely still. The door handle moved. Someone was trying it from outside, one motion professional, assessing the resistance of the lock, a pause. Then the footsteps continued past the door and kept moving down the corridor. The sixth operative was not checking rooms. He was looking for a specific destination. He's going to the north stair, Thomas said very quietly. He'll find it open, Miller said. He'll go down to the hub, Cross, and he'll find the east corridor, and he'll know what happened, Restier said. Which means he'll know we're still in the building, Miller said, and his phone buzzed in his pocket at the exact same moment, a vibration he checked, and then exhaled once a single controlled breath. Calloway's inside, he said. He came through the ambulance bay. He's got 4 people with him. He looked up. He sent me the name. The hub went very quiet around that sentence. The leak, Thomas said. His deputy director, Miller said. 12 years, full access to operational asset tracking, field communication channels, and Dofedin. He paused, the briefing I sent 2 hours ago with the tactical layout for this position. Thomas said nothing for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was even, which was a form of control she had learned to recognize in people who are feeling something they don't have time to feel right now. Does Calloway have it documented? He says he has everything. Digital trail communications, log financial transfer records. Miller put the phone away. It's over. The institutional piece is over. The sixth operative isn't, Reyes said, as if on cue from below them from the hub through the floor. Traveling through the bones of the building, the way sound does in old structures, came the sound of voices. 2 of them. Calloway's people making contact with the sixth operative or the sixth operative making a decision about Calloway's people, and either version of that sentence had a range of outcomes that varied considerably. Then a single sharp sound. Not an explosion sharper, faster, a sound Selena had never heard in this building before, which meant she was hearing it for the first time under circumstances she would not soon forget. Then silence. Miller's phone buzzed. He looked at it. Calloway says they have him. The sixth is down. Non-lethal. He looked around at the four people in the elevator shaft, landing Thomas pale and upright through sheer determination, crossed with her bruised jaw and her operational stillness, Reyes with the focused readiness of someone who is still waiting for the next thing, even when the next thing has become nothing. And Selena Grant, who had started this 48 hours ago with a cold atropine push in a trauma bay, and had arrived here in the bones of her own building on the other side of something she didn't have language for yet. "It's done," Miller said. She sat down on the floor of the elevator shaft landing because her legs, which had been entirely reliable for the past 4 hours, decided that this was the moment to register an opinion. She sat with her back against the wall and looked at the ceiling and let out a breath that felt like it had been held since 6:17 in the morning 2 days ago, when she had walked out of Harlan Voss's office with her career in question and her hands shaking in the parking lot. Thomas slid down the wall beside her. Not gracefully, the wound made everything ungraceful now, but deliberately choosing to sit rather than waiting to fall. He sat close enough that she could hear his breathing, still controlled, still deliberate. "You held this building," he said. "This building held itself," she said. "I just knew where the weak points were." "That's what holding means," he said. They sat there in the dark for a moment, the two of them, while Miller made calls above them, and Reyes and Cross secured the road to the ground floor and somewhere in the east wing of St. Jude's Medical Center. The automated systems were doing what automated systems do: logging, resetting, managing the evidence of an extraordinary night in the language of maintenance reports and suppression system activations, and a hydraulic bridge that was going to need significant repair. Calloway found them 12 minutes later. He came up the north stair with two of his people, and the expression of a man who has spent the last several hours dismantling something he spent 12 years building and has not yet decided how to feel about that. He looked at Thomas, first the assessment of someone checking on an asset, and then at Miller, and then at Selena, and his gaze stopped there. "You're the nurse," he said. "People keep saying that." She said, like it's supposed to be surprising. Something shifted in his face. He reached into his jacket and produced a document, folded, official-looking, the kind of paperwork that carries institutional weight without requiring explanation. "The review board scheduled for Friday," he said. "It's been withdrawn. Your license documentation has been restored to the hospital system. The federal hold on your records has been reclassified. It will no longer appear in any employment verification." He held it out to her. "This is formal documentation of your cooperation with a federal investigation and a commendation for actions taken under duress that resulted in the preservation of a classified asset and the prevention of further casualties." She looked at the document and did not take it immediately. "What about Voss?" she said. Calloway's expression did not change. "Dr. Voss filed a complaint based on information he believed to be accurate at the time. That complaint has been reviewed in light of full contextual information and determined to be without merit." A pause. "He has also been informed that the patient he dismissed that night survived due to a nursing intervention that correctly identified a classified toxic compound information that has now been shared with his department chief." She thought about Harlan Voss, his silver hair, and his unhurried confidence, and his back turning on a man who was dying in a specific and engineered way. She took the document. "Patricia Holt," she said. "She needs to know that whatever she arranged tonight—" "Ms. Holt has been briefed at the appropriate level," Calloway said. "She asked me to tell you that your shift is covered, and the review board coffee would have been terrible anyway." That was so precisely Patricia that Selena felt something unlock in her chest that she hadn't fully realized was locked. She pressed her thumb and forefinger against the bridge of her nose for exactly 3 seconds, the closest she came in the presence of other people to what she was feeling, and then she put her hand down and looked at Calloway steadily. "The deputy director," she said. "The leak." "In custody as of 40 minutes ago," Calloway said. "The full chain is being processed. It will take months, but the manufacturing network for Hex 7 loses its primary intelligence cover tonight. That's done." He paused. "Thomas's operation. The 3 prior deaths it was designed to prevent. They're going to matter." "They already mattered," Thomas said from the floor without opening his eyes. "The nurse made all of that." Miller, who had been on his phone in the corner of the landing, came back into the conversation with the look of someone who has reached a decision he's been approaching for the past hour. He looked at Selena directly the way he had looked at her in the safe house when he'd said, "This building holds us all, and the way he'd looked at her in the hub when she'd said, "Then we're ready," and the way he looked at her now, which was different from both of those and more complete. "There's a position," he said, "on my team. It's not official. Nothing I run is official. That's the point of it. But it's real and it matters and it requires someone who can do exactly what you did tonight." He let that sit for a moment. Not shooting, not tactics. What you do. Reading a situation that everyone else thinks they understand and seeing what's actually happening. Knowing the ground, keeping people alive who would otherwise not be alive. He paused. "You don't have to decide tonight." She looked at him. Then she looked at Thomas still sitting against the wall with his eyes closed and his breathing steady and the particular dignity of a man who has been through everything available to go through and is still present. Then she looked at the walls of St. Jude's Medical Center around her old walls. Well-known walls, every crack and idiosyncrasy of them familiar as her own handwriting. "I want to talk to Patricia before I decide anything," she said. "That's fair," Miller said. "And Thomas needs a surgical consult. The wound needs to be properly assessed by someone with actual equipment, not a trauma kit in a safe house." "Also fair," Thomas said, without opening his eyes. "And I want it in writing," she said to Miller, "that whatever I decide, stay or go, my license is intact and my employment record is clean. Not as a condition of deciding, just as a fact." "It's already a fact," Calloway said. "Documented. It was never in question, not after tonight." She nodded once. Then she stood up because the floor of an elevator shaft landing in a closed hospital wing at 11:30 at night was not where she was going to make the decision about the rest of her life. She had always done her best thinking in motion, and she was not going to change that now. She reached down and offered Thomas her hand. He looked at it for a moment, this man who operated in shadows, who trusted almost no one who had called her from an unknown number, because she was the one person in this city who had seen him clearly and acted on it, and then he took it and she helped him up. He was heavy and the angle was awkward, and the wound made him breathe sharply through his nose, and she held steady until he was fully upright, which was what she always did. They came out of St. Jude's Medical Center through the service entrance at 11:47. The November air hit her like a reset, cold, clean, indifferent to everything that had happened inside. There were vehicles in the lot she didn't recognize. There were people moving with purpose in the way that people move when a situation is shifting from active to managed. Somewhere in the building behind her, the systems were logging and resetting, and the East Wing was being quietly processed by people who knew how to process things quietly. Patricia Holt was standing at the service entrance. Not in her administrative capacity, no clipboard, no official posture, just a woman of 60 who had run a nursing department for 9 years and had been told enough tonight to understand what her charge nurse had walked through, standing outside in a November coat with her hands in her pockets and her face saying everything she wasn't going to say in front of people she didn't know. Selena walked toward her and Patricia reached out and gripped her arm once firmly, the gesture of someone who is not given to dramatic expressions of emotion and is making an exception. "You look terrible," Patricia said. "You're the second person tonight who said that to me," Selena said. "The first one meant it as a compliment." "So do I," Patricia said. She looked at Selena for a long moment, taking inventory the way people do when they've been worried and are now accounting for every detail to confirm that the worry is over. "Miller spoke to me." "I know. He told me what you did in there. Not the tactical version, the version that monitors. What you knew about this building, how you used it." Patricia paused. "I've watched you work for 9 years, Selena. I have never once had to tell you what to do. I have also never once in 9 years told you what you are worth. That is a professional failing I intend to correct in my next review." She said it with the dry precision of a woman who delivers the important things as matter-of-factly as possible, because she finds that the only way she can deliver them at all. "Whatever you decide, wherever you go, you should know what you are." Selena looked at her, this woman who had sent her into the building with a key card and 2 words and had been standing at the service entrance when she came out. She felt the full weight of 11 years settle and then very quietly lift. "I'll call you," she said. "You'd better," Patricia said. "I'm not training another charge nurse." She turned. Miller was waiting at the edge of the lot, hands in his jacket pockets, as patient in the way of someone who has learned that the decisions that matter cannot be rushed and has stopped trying to rush them. Thomas was beside him, standing with assistance from Reyes, but standing. Cross was already in one of the vehicles. The Denver night stretched out around them cold and clear, the city going about its ordinary business, entirely unaware of what had been decided inside St. Jude's Medical Center between 10 o'clock and midnight on a Wednesday in November. Selena Grant stood at the boundary between the building she had known for 11 years and everything else, and she made her decision not with drama, not with ceremony, but with the same clean, clear certainty that had guided every critical decision she had ever made. The same certainty that had made her pick up the phone to the pharmacy when Voss walked away. The same certainty that had made her lean close to a dying man and ask the right question. The same certainty that had held a hydraulic bridge valve in the dark and known exactly when to turn it. She walked toward Milne. "I'm in," she said. He nodded once as if he had known, and perhaps he had, and perhaps it didn't matter either way because the answer was the same. Behind her, St. Jude's Medical Center stood exactly as it always had, familiar, substantial, full of the ordinary heroism of people doing difficult things in fluorescent light for not enough money and not enough recognition. She had been one of them. She was proud of every single day of it, and she carried every one of those days with her as she crossed the parking lot toward whatever came next, because a woman who has spent 11 years learning to see what others miss does not leave that knowledge behind. She carries it forward. She uses it. She protects people with it in whatever room she finds herself in. Selena Grant had never been invisible. She had simply been waiting in the particular patience of the genuinely capable for the world to look in the right direction. Now it had, and she was ready.